All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Louise Sternberg, and I'm a member of the Alumni Engagement Team with the College of Engineering and Applied Science. And I'm excited to be here this afternoon to introduce Rebecca Komarek, Assistant Director of the Idea Forge. Housed in the College of Engineering and Applied Science, the Idea Forge is a flexible, cross-disciplinary, collaborative space where students can imagine, design, create, and test products and solutions to meet a range of societal and customer needs. Rebecca is here to discuss the basics of design thinking, a human-centered approach to innovation. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Rebecca Komarek.
Thank you very much, Louise, and welcome to all of our attendees today. It's wonderful to see so many people interested in this topic and interested in the Idea Forge. So you can see one of the main spaces of the Idea Forge behind me. And to keep it short, we are the campus design and prototyping facility. So we're happy to share with you today. So to get started, the plans that I have for today can be as interactive as you choose. So if we can get the link shared in the chat, please. I plan to use an online collaborative software called Mural. And if you would like to literally contribute to the session today, you can click on the link and you will be invited to sign up to join the Mural as a guest. So you can put in your initials, your first name, and so you're welcome to do it that way. Additionally, I will be sharing my screen. So if you'd rather just follow along and watch, you are certainly welcome to do that as well. So dive in there and I will share my screen. Okay, so for those of you who have gone into Mural, you should see kind of a whiteboard type space. I have some powers as facilitator here where I can summon you to me. So I just did that. So right now I have some control. So if you, you should be able to see yourself moving around. And let's see, and I'm going to hide other people's cursors just so that they're not distracting. So we're just going to get started with a little intro to this actual software. So this is our whiteboard. So envision it as a whiteboard. You can envision these little boxes as Post-it notes or sticky notes. And so this is our little, it's our, what's the word I'm looking for? Our icebreaker here. So think a time machine. So if you could go back in time, what period would you go to? So if you would like to add a Post-it note, just double click on the area. And it just so happens I have the circle shaped ones, but a Post-it note will pop up. And you can write in there what time period in the history of time you'd like to go back to. If you're interested in putting in a picture, you can go to the left bar and there's a small icon that looks like mountains with a sun or a moon. And you can click there and you can search for GIFs or for images. So if I were to type in 80s hair, I would come up with some really great options of, how I missed the 80s and I want to go back and spend more time there. So again, this is just kind of a fun time to familiarize yourself with the software for those of you who have logged in. So feel free to do that. You can close that, you can open and close the menu on the left using those icons. So I see a couple people who are contributing. Wonderful. So let me release everyone. Okay. Someone wants to go back to the 60s and see some sweet concerts. I would absolutely agree to that. See the Beatles, back in the day, right? Wouldn't that be fun? The examples I have here, the 20s, the roaring 20s, It was just after it was just after the Spanish flu. So no wonder they were the roaring 20s. I feel like I have much better understanding of that these days than maybe I did in the past. So I think I see some Paris coming out here, an Eiffel Tower image. So absolutely. So I'll give maybe one more minute just to kind of work and familiarize yourself basically with this software. Again, you can double click and add in a Post-it note. Also the little Post-it note type icon on the left, you can pick what your Post-it note looks like if you're happy with kind of the classic. Looks like someone's interested in 1890 in Philadelphia. So I'm sure there's a story there and certain things that would be of interest, the art, the culture, the era. Okay, so now I think the folks that have signed on are hopefully a little bit more familiarized. We'll kind of get started moving forward with what I have planned today. So when you're in this program, if you, it's easy to navigate using the outline on the right. And if your outline doesn't show for you, you can click this icon. It looks like bullets, 3 bullets and a little icon box. You can click that and use the outline. And so I'm going to head over to number 2 on our outline called design thinking. And I'm going to summon you to me. Again, you can release yourself if you do feel like scrolling around, but if you are following me, right at the beginning here, I have kind of a little PowerPoint presentation embedded here within this software. So design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation. It can be referred to as a method for creative problem solving. So I think of it as one tool or framework that can be really useful to have kind of in your broader arsenal. It's not necessarily the be all end all of solve all of the world problems, but it can be a really useful tool with keeping a focus on being human-centered and a focus on designing and innovating with users in mind. So now I'm scrolling to the right here. So if you are following me, you should be following with me. Again, I can summon you to where I am. And so design thinking really helps you find the desirability of an innovation, of a new design, of a solution, and helps you kind of really reach that sweet spot that makes it desirable, viable, as well as technically feasible. So while business is noted here, maybe this is viable from a nonprofit standpoint. It's really viable from whatever context you're in, desirable to the people, and technically feasible, like it's something that can actually be obtained. So the Stanford D School stands for Design School, is really at the forefront of all things design thinking. So if you're ever out there looking for other resources, things that are put out by the D School are usually quality and usually really useful. So the design thinking process starts with empathizing. So really trying to get a true understanding of your user's perspective. And you can do that through interviewing, shadowing, observing. You're really seeking to understand their context and their experiences. So based on that empathy, you want to define the problem that you're really trying to solve. You want to understand the people, their objectives, their goals, their pain points. So that generally is the next phase you would evolve into in the design process. And then you use that information to ideate upon new solutions, new ideas for improvement, for change. And so the goal is to diverge your line of thinking. So meaning come up with a lot of potential ideas and then converge back on one solution or idea that you want to pursue, one or a few that you want to pursue moving forward. So this is all best done in a group to get a diversity of perspectives. And generally, in terms of this yes and thinking, everything is supposed to be encouraged. So even crazy ideas Even if they're not actually feasible or something that might happen, those crazy ideas are encouraged as a way to build upon, to get to the ideas that are a little bit more out of the box, but yet still possible. So generally, once you have that idea and it's been decided upon, you move forward with a prototype. So the things noted here: mock-ups, storyboards, keeping it simple, the idea of failing fast, learning from your prototype, so that you can continue to iterate and improve upon it. And so you have your prototype and you want to get it in front of users. You want to get it in front of the stakeholders that you're interested in learning from, and understand, what about your prototype works, what about your prototype doesn't work, so that you can iterate and continue to improve. So while this process looks relatively linear in this diagram, you can go back, you might end up going back to various aspects of the process and starting again. You might go back to the ideation phase. The prototype and testing phase is typically has lots of iterations, which also may require you to go back and empathize and talk to your users again in a more foundational way. I added this, the Design for America design process. This is a student group that I work with. And so this student group exists at CU Boulder. And so more or less, you can see that there is, zoom in and zoom out here. The Design for America process is pretty similar to the Stanford D-School process. The one thing that I really like here is this opportunity to reframe. So based upon, you're identifying an area in which to work, you're really immersing yourself in it, but then you're reframing that question before you go into the problem solving. You're making sure that you have the right question before you move forward towards something that's more like a solution. So moving on, just to provide you an example of design thinking at work. This is just a picture of an infant incubator. And so I'm bringing you to me again here. And so the example that I want to give you is actually from a class at Stanford, where it's a class called Design for Extreme Affordability. So students in this class were tasked with designing a new lower cost infant incubator. So infants, when they're born, is very important, especially for premature infants, to stay warm. And so the idea was that they needed to design a more cost-effective infant incubator. And so the team of business students and engineering students that were gathered together to solve this challenge, they figured they had two different routes they could take. Number one, they could look at all the materials, they could look at the design and try to figure out how to streamline it. How do we get cheaper materials? How do we devise a lower cost manufacturing process? Or they could blow up the whole idea. It would be harder, it would be more challenging, but they could tackle it from that direction of like, what's actually going on here and how do they solve it? So it just so happened that one of their teammates received some grant funding to travel to Nepal and use this opportunity to explore this challenge. And in hospitals in Nepal, this student realized that there are plenty of incubators at these hospitals and they weren't being used. So they were there, but the utilization rate was really low. And so once the students started talking to individuals there and started talking to people further away from the city centers, he learned that babies who are born in more rural areas, it's very unlikely that they're going to get to the hospital. The idea of a mother taking a small child, a newborn, a premature infant on a bus or on long, days of travel to a hospital was really unlikely. And so while this technology existed, it wasn't serving the people that it needed to serve. So they reframed their question. So instead of trying to figure out how might we design a new or less expensive infant incubator, they reframed the question to how can we design a solution for keeping a baby warm? And so with that reframe of the question, they were able to pivot from thinking about an incubator to thinking about a way to keep babies warm. So you can see more or less this infant is in like a sleeping bag. It's an infant sleep sack. So the solution that they came up with is this kind of a sleeping bag device. There's an insert in it. It's made of paraffin wax that can be heated. in boiling water, so low-cost solutions that are available in most locations. The paraffin is heated in boiling water or warm water, and then it is inserted into this pouch. And so now they have a way to keep babies warm that is applicable in that setting. And they learn this from really an immersive experience, diving in and talking to those users and understanding the limitations and the challenges on the ground. So they have this prototype, and then they went and continued to gather information. And they learned that in terms of, they determined that they needed a temperature indicator. And their initial thought was they would get numbers, that it's, X degrees and for whatever the desired temperature was, so that people would know when to warm up this kind of baby sleep sack again. But based on their user feedback, pretty much they learned that the numbers weren't especially useful, but it was just a, it's okay, or it needs to be warmed up indicator. So like a green or a red kind of indicator was sufficient to do what needed to be done in these circumstances. So this is a company that's still around. It's called Embrace, and they were able to reframe that question and use design thinking methods to really get at the real problem. How do we keep babies warm? And they were able to do that in these rural settings. So with that kind of intro in mind, we're going to dive into some tactics around design thinking and talk through some parts of the process. So we're going to start with the empathy phase. And in your outline over here, we're going to go to the interviewing tab, but I think you're all are under my control right now. You'll get to the interactive part in a few minutes. But in terms of interviewing, it's really important to talk to the users of your potential project, to talk to the people who are most affected by the challenge that you're trying to address. So some interview tips here. It's important to prepare the questions that you plan to ask in advance. And we always tell students to go in pairs. So if we can have two people go to an interview, one person is asking questions, the other person is taking notes. So I have a few questions here that are just kind of examples of good and bad interview questions and reactions to the feedback that you're getting in an interviewing type setting. So remember, the goal here is to try to really empathize with your user. So the first one is an ice cream question. And the question is, do you like ice cream? And ultimately, that's a pretty easy question. I mean, I would guess most of the people, I'm sure not all, but most of the people on this call would say, well, yeah, sure. It's like, great. So it's easy to go in and say, hey, do you like my idea? Of course, people are going to be yes. People are nice. They're going to say, yeah, that's a great idea. And I'm talking to college students. They just feel like other people like, oh, you're in college, you're solving this problem. That's great. But it's not going to get you very far when it comes to actually interviewing. So do you like ice cream? A better question might be, what is your biggest challenge in this area? So it's not, hey, do you like my solution? It's more of an aspect of trying to understand what the true challenge is. Next, you might ask, do you get headaches frequently? Well, a better question would be to ask, do you get headaches occasionally? Because as I self-identify, I might say, well, I don't get headaches frequently, but I do get headaches on occasion. So I might be able to still provide you useful feedback. If that first question, you might be taking me out of I might just say no, and then you're done. But you may be making your potential user category too narrow by having questions that it's a little too tight. Do you get headaches frequently? No. Do you get headaches occasionally? Yes. Most people, I would imagine, do. So it just leaves you a little bit more broad in the people that you can talk to. Similarly, when you ask someone, say, how many times a week do you work out? So if you all think about this, and how many times a week do you work out? And then let's answer this question of yourself. How many times did you work out last week? Because in my perfect, vision of myself, I work out at least 3 times a week. But then when you ask me how many times I worked out last week, I may admit that I only worked out once. So the actual activity is, what has actually happened is more indicative of someone's true habits than their idealized self. So similarly, If I asked you, what diet do you follow? You might say, well, I am gluten-free 100%. And then I ask you to describe your last meal. And you might tell me that you had, pizza down on Pearl Street, and, it might become clear that it's not exactly gluten-free. So, that your willpower in your idealized brain might be a bit stronger than your willpower in real life. So truly trying to understand what actual activity people are taking. Additionally, if you were to ask, do you like to travel? Someone might say, yes, I love to travel. But you're going to get a better insights if you say, tell me about the last time you took a vacation. People love to talk about vacations, right? They're willing to tell stories, and you're going to get a lot of insights from stories. So if you ask me if I like to travel, I might be like, yes, I took a road trip around the US and we went camping everywhere and it was amazing. And that, your perspective of what travel looks like is maybe a beach in Mexico staying at the Four Seasons. So people have very different definitions of what a trip looks like, what travel looks like. It may be local, it may be farther, maybe I like to go internationally, you like to stay in Colorado. So you want to ask questions that are open-ended and that will truly get at what people's true activities are and get them to tell stories. You can see some of these tips in the middle here, that stories are generally greater than statements. You can get a lot of insight from someone's stories. Additionally, an N of 1 is not proof. So if you get feedback from someone and one person is really adamant that this is the perfect solution, that doesn't mean that that is the perfect solution for everyone who is affected by this challenge. Additionally, especially in an entrepreneurial setting, no pitching your solution, no pitching your ideas already. The goal is to learn from your user, and that is the point of your interview. And then another great tip is silence. So silence is uncomfortable. So if you are getting someone to tell a story and you think maybe they're kind of wrapping up on their story, or say they're wrapping up on their answer, it's really useful just to stay silent, let the silence lag for a little bit. And oftentimes that person that you're interviewing is going to speak to fill that silence because it's a little bit uncomfortable. And some of the really gems can come out during that time. So it takes a bit of patience and a willingness to let things get a little bit awkward. So a couple of acting listening techniques too. So if someone's telling you a story, instead of simply saying that's interesting, you might turn that into a question and say, try to understand why. So if you're trying to design a new water bottle and someone says they really like their water bottle that they use, you can see this with my virtual background, probably not water bottle in my hand. They really love their water bottle. So you want to ask, why do they love it? They're like, oh, well, it's a great color. Well, why do you like that color? Because it reminds me, or it makes me match my kids' water bottle, because they like that we have the same water bottle. You just kind of keep asking why, and you're going to get a lot deeper into someone's reasoning, why they're choosing to do the things they do, the things they purchase, their experiences. You get a lot further into it. So when there's something that you don't understand in an interview, instead of saying, I don't get it, you can ask clarifying questions. What do you mean by that? So you're still asking questions and you're keeping people talking. Similarly, instead of saying, okay, kind of stopping things short, keep things coming, get them to tell you more. When something, sad or negative comes up, you want to sympathize with someone, you want to empathize, right? That's what we're trying to do here. Instead of simply saying that's too bad, you could ask, well, how are you dealing with this problem now? So if they're talking about how something's challenging, it's like, how are you working through that now? Gives you more insight about how that person is experiencing this challenge currently. So those are some tips about interviewing. It's really useful to be taking notes and gathering all of your notes or all of your various interviews together so that you can look at trends and in the future, look at trends kind of at the end of the day. I mean, there's various entrepreneurial kind of programs that use a similar tactic, and they encourage people to do 100 interviews of potential customers and people who are stakeholders in a given space. So quantity is important in this area to try to get a diversity of perspectives so that you can find those trends and find those patterns that will help you lead to better empathizing with your users and with stakeholders in a given situation. So moving on, I will release you all soon, I promise. But once you get this information from your interviews, obviously, as I've said, you should be taking notes, you should be looking for patterns, but there's a couple ways to, these are just a couple of the ways to kind of, to bring this data down to something that's actionable, that helps you like really gain insights on your users. So first, looking at this left image, which shows the hiker. So this is what's referred to as a journey map. So this is the journey map of someone who is, say, taking a trip and staying at a hotel. So you can see all of the steps in the process. The person would research hotels, make a reservation, arrive at the hotel, check in, use a guest room, use the amenities, pay and check out, and depart. So when you're interviewing, you can explore given points during this entire journey and say, wow, was check-in really difficult? You know, you can gauge their mood during this whole time. Like researching hotels, that was fun. Making a reservation, we're going on a trip, that felt great. But then you realize that your user, that their check-in process was really hard. Maybe the credit card reader didn't work. Maybe they had to wait for 20 minutes to check in the first place. And so you can find out these pain points that your user is experiencing at a given point in their journey of taking advantage of this service. And then you can focus your solution and focus your design efforts in addressing, say, that check-in process. How do we improve the check-in process at our given hotel? Because you've done some research with your users to figure out what is the pain point in their overall process. Additionally, when you're focusing on your users, you can create a persona profile. So you know that you are hoping to reach a given population of people who, say, live in a given community, who are part of a certain age group or other demographic. You can create a persona profile. So in this persona profile on the right, we have Steve, who is 47 years old. He's a businessman and he's been in this role for 10 years. So you can see various facts about him. And he's kind of a made up person, kind of a amalgamation of all of your users and the information that you have gathered thus far. So you can see how he finds resources, how he gathers information, what his pain points are, what he wants to know, like how your solution might help him, and then also what he doesn't want, what's important to him, price and expertise. So you can create a persona, again, that's kind of a combination of all of the people you've met with, and then use that as a guiding light, if you will, as you work toward defining your true problem, and then eventually designing some sort of a potential solution. Okay, so we're going to move forward to number 5 on our outline. And the idea is using all of this information that we've gathered so far into a problem statement. So let's see, I'm going to summon all of you to me. So I've moved to number 5 and then kind of zoomed out a bit so that you should be able to see the problem statement box as well as the problem statement number 2 box. So in design thinking, you need to define a problem statement that's going to focus your efforts moving forward. And so you define a how might we statement. So as an example, you might be designing, how might we design a way to interact with healthy food for kids in the produce section. So we are identifying a need and a user. So this is, say, our persona, and some kind of a feature. So maybe that's its location, maybe that's a color, maybe that's some kind of defining feature about our potential solution. So for those of you who are in the mural board with me, please feel free to start grabbing some of these Post-its and determining, is it a need? Is it a user or is it a feature? And let's just categorize all of these Post-its here on the board on the right. Wonderful. I see some people moving already. So it looks like we could find some kind of out of the box problem statements here. A way to get groceries for wrestlers in 2 minutes. Maybe that's not exactly the thing that we're truly trying to solve. It's kind of Mad Libs, really. So I'm glad to see all this interaction here. So you, as you define your how might we statement, you utilize all of the data and information that you have brought forth from your interviews, from your research, from say observations, from whatever information you have in a given context. And the goal is to define a how might we statement. So you can, how might we design a way to get groceries for the elderly during COVID isolation? And so that's how kind of defining your statement works. So then once you have your statement, you can move on to the ideation phase, which is essentially brainstorming. So again, it's very important to have a group of people in this environment because you do want to build on each other. So I'm going to click on our number 6 here on our outline on the right. And I'll summon you all to me just so you make sure you're at least start in the right place. And we are going to have a little brainstorming session here together for a few minutes today. So a couple of guidelines here regarding brainstorming. It's important to defer judgment, to go for volume. So you're not judging other people's brainstorm ideas. You're saying yes, and. So you're building off of them if possible. Even if it's something crazy, the idea is to say yes, and. And then you want to go for volume. You want a lot of options. You want to just keep building upon the ideas of others. Generally, you want to stay on topic, encourage wild ideas, and be visual. So if it's something like it's beneficial to sketch, it's beneficial to put images in. So, you know, think of all those things as opportunities here. And again, you can put images into this area using the little mountain icon here on the left. And so what we're going to be brainstorming around right here is how might we design a writing utensil for the elderly? So if you're interacting here with me, feel free to put in Post-its. Again, you double click and you can add a Post-it and put an idea. So this might be a complete idea for a full writing utensil for the elderly, or maybe it's just some kind of aspect of what that writing utensil should be. So please feel open to all of those things and just add in a couple of ideas here. And then you can read other people's contributions and build off of them as well. So I'll give you maybe 2 minutes to put in some initial ideas. And you can zoom in as well. If things are hard to read, feel free to zoom in. Yeah, I see some great ideas coming through already. A texture to make it easier to hold. Findable, so something that might get lost. So it needs to be found. So yeah, so that makes me think IoT enabled. That's Internet of Things, you know, all of our smart everything these days. And then, yes, let's start thinking about like what's different about the elderly when it comes to utensil needs. You know, certainly something to think about, kind of a guiding question there for us. Arthritis friendly, larger diameter. Yep, absolutely. Let's see, you can't throw it away. So reusable. Let's see. I see a note for easy flowing ink. So you don't have to scribble to get things rolling at the beginning, which I would appreciate. I don't know if that's unique to the elderly. I would appreciate that. And so you can do a brainstorming session in this way, in person and in smaller groups. It's useful to say your ideas out loud. I mean, it's useful to have people do their ideas, quietly, like everybody comes up with a few ideas on their own, but then when they put them on the board, say them out loud to help kind of build conversation, to help people build off of ideas off of one another. And if the energy starts to ebb or the productivity starts to slow down a little bit, one great idea to kind of keep people moving is to add in a constraint. So if we take our same problem statement, how might we design a writing utensil for the elderly? Will you add in a constraint? So how about a writing utensil that provides self-defense? So again, we're being a little silly here, but if you add in a constraint such as this, it gets things flowing even more. So maybe our constraint provides self-defense. Maybe it self-destructs after you hit a button and 30 seconds have gone by. So any ideas now that if we add things, a mace canister that writes, like how, something the size of a pen that fits in a purse, that's also a mace canister, that's great in terms of a writing utensil that provides self-defense. So adding in constraints can be a really useful, easy way to kind of get the juices flowing again when you're having a brainstorming session. So I'm glad, thank you for contributing here. It was fun to see all of your contributions. And so once this is kind of the diverging stage. So you're coming up with a lot of ideas. And then after you do that, then the challenge is, say, moving all your Post-its into categories. Are there certain themes? And then the group of people that you're brainstorming with, that you're designing with, there needs to be some sort of a process to down select. So is it voting? Is it, asking someone else? Like there has to be a defined process to figure out which solution or type of solution you want to focus on moving forward. So once you decide that, then you can move forward with prototyping whatever solution you decide upon. So on the outline on the right, I'm going to hit the prototype _ test number 7. You get to I'll talk about prototyping for a little bit. So you've brainstormed, you've decided on a way to move forward. And then your next step is creating some sort of a prototype. So what is a prototype? Okay, I'm bringing you to me again. A prototype is a physical or digital representation of critical aspects of your final design. So a prototype might be a representation of your full solution, but it also might be a representation of a small critical aspect. So you might just be testing out the size, and you create a prototype to test out the size of your idea. And of course, when I say size, I'm referring more to, say, a physical product, but really this does apply to non-physical things too, like services or experiences. So at the Idea Forge, we talk about prototyping a lot, but we also talk about pretotyping, which we refer to as this really early stage prototyping. So as you can see, this is the Dyson hairdryer, pictures of all of the different prototypes, and you can see all the iterations that went into it as they developed this product. You can also see this very low cost, low budget pretotype that they had at the beginning. It's made out of PVC pipe. And I imagine that they had this and they used it to test the size. And, does it feel right in your hand? They probably could test some weight aspects of it. And then they use that to move forward to the final product. So we encourage students all the time to start with a pretotype. Let's make it out of cardboard or foam or however else you can get a very low level representation, quick, dirty, some very inexpensive representation that you can use to get feedback from your users so that you can use to learn about what you're trying to design. So just for fun, I have another similar photo here. So this is an example from Spectrum's rings. And so Spectrum's was a CU Boulder startup that was started by students. And they did a similar prototyping process. and they made their final ring in the Idea Forge. And what Spectrum's rings do is that you can wear this ring, and it's attached to an app on your phone. And when you tap various colors in your environment, so you wear this ring and you tap a black desk or you tap a green water bottle, it makes different sounds. So you can use this ring to make sounds that sound like the piano. So you can use multiple rings and play the piano around your home. You can play the drums around your home, tapping different colors. And so it's a really fun innovation, and it's something that's been adopted by music educators. And in this company went through a lot of the resources at CU Boulder entrepreneurially, and then their company was actually acquired by Spiro, which is a local robotics company. So they were really able to take advantage of this prototyping experience. You can see the first one was pretty big and ugly, and how they iterated through to get something that was pretty sleek at the end of the day. So to finish talking about prototyping, why do we prototype? We want to answer a question to move our project forward using the smallest investment in time and money. So we try to encourage students to start with household objects, to start with things that you can find around the Idea Forge, to start with things that you can find at Home Depot. And then once you prototype, you want to move on to user testing. So you have users actually experience your prototype and get feedback. And as you can see on the left here, their prototype is made out of construction paper. So it's absolutely possible to do prototyping with very minimal materials. And also you can prototype anything from products to processes and to services and experiences. So that's just a little test, a little taste of prototyping and testing. And I encourage you, if that's something that really is of interest to you, the Idea Forge is also hosting another session like this with the alumni engagement team on June 9th. So if you're in the mural with me, you can click on this open link here and sign up for that one. But this one is being taught by the director of the Idea Forge, Daria Koda-Schwartz. And with that, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm happy to answer questions and clarify things that may have been unclear. And I'd also like to thank the alumni engagement team. It's been fun collaborating to make this happen.
Thanks, Rebecca. We do have a few questions. A couple people wondered if you would be sharing the slides after the talk, and I can send those out if you're willing. I did want to tell everybody too that we're recording this presentation.
Yes, I'd be happy to share some resources that I have. So number one, I can share this mural board so people can see this, but I also have it in a more traditional PDF PowerPoint format. So I can share that as well.
Great. And do you have any suggestions for related books or sites or tweeters that you would recommend to learn more about design thinking?
Sure. So one group that is just always really useful is the Stanford D School. They have a lot of resources online. So that's through Stanford University. D School is in design school. They have a public library of design thinking related blogs, activities. So the D School Public Library is one, that's an online resource, as well as there's a company called IDEO. And so they're really well known in the design field, and they have it's a toolkit. So it would be the IDEO toolkit, and they have a book that is kind of really, really useful for kind of coming up with these sorts of things, activities and kind of the mindset and how to run, how to guide design for others. So that's IDEO. So pretty much anything by IDEO is going to be useful as well. Additionally, there's a book called Creative Confidence, and that is by Tom Kelly and one other Kelly. There's two of them, they're brothers, but that is a good one as well. And that's a book entitled Creative Confidence.
Cool, thank you. So David asked, if the customer and end user are not the same, who do you prioritize the design for? And he says, yeah, think of a parent customer buying a toy for their kid, the user.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's such a great question. And as a team is trying to tackle this challenge, I think it's important to talk to both. And so the difference, the user is the kid, the person who's actually engaging with your design, but the customer is the person who's actually shelling out the money. And so they're both in the category of stakeholders. So I would encourage talking to all of these people. And I think that one of the most useful tools in that kind of scenario is really that reframing your question. And I think that you're able to reframe your question. You hopefully can reframe your question in a way where you can meet in the middle and try to, address both the user. It's a double-edged sword of the user and the customer. It's a double-edged sword because you need the user to want to use it, but you also need the customer to be willing to buy it. So it's certainly a challenge, but I also think that this often comes up with entrepreneurs, that they need to continue to talk to people, gather information, but ultimately those entrepreneurs need to make a decision about what is the highest priority in their given situation. I mean, I think that that's going to differ in any given circumstance.
Thank you for that. From Bill, he was wondering what problems might be encountered when implementing design thinking in a hierarchical organization.
Yeah, that's certainly a challenge. And I think that just, being able to implement design thinking as a problem-solving technique, there really needs to be buy-in at all levels, especially in a hierarchical organization. People need to be on board with and be willing to kind of engage in these practices. And when there is hierarchy, there can be limitations on what people who are lower in the hierarchy are willing to contribute, the things, those ideas that they're willing to toss out in the brainstorming session, or just the comfort in challenging other people's ideas. And so I think that buy-in is important, and there does need to be a culture where everyone is comfortable sharing and being able to kind of have no holds barred, in terms of being able to come up with ideas and work together.
Yeah. Okay, from Dawn, how does this topic apply to someone in the professional services profession? In this case, computer services.
I'm not exactly certain what computer services means, but I believe that aspects of this method can be useful really in any kind of group setting where you're working to solve a given challenge. And so if you're able to define that problem statement, and I feel like that could be in any industry, then you can brainstorm around solutions to that problem. But again, such a key aspect here is the user experience, making sure that the benefactors of the solution, that the people who are engaging with the solution have a say, that you get their perspective before you start designing solutions. And I just believe that could be applied really in most any setting.
Okay, from our buddy Jennifer at the ITLP, she was wondering, do you have any tips for bringing design thinking into the K through 12 teaching and learning space?
I think, Jennifer, I think that you are way more abreast of best practices in the K through 12 learning space than I am. But what I would say, it's things that we always want to encourage in our young kids are to continue to have curiosity, that they have the ability to ask questions. And I think that exposing them to opportunities to ask questions and really engage with the answers and use those answers as they, try to say, offer potential solutions and come up with ideas. I really think that just the ability to end the support and asking those questions, which sometimes can feel that maybe parents or other adults might be annoyed by, kids ask a lot of questions. But I think that it's a really great aspect of this whole method that kids should be able to be, or should be encouraged to do as they get older.
Thanks for that. Okay, from Chris, is task-centered design still in use for software design?
Unfortunately, that's one that is above my pay grade. I am not especially attuned to the current software design practices, so I apologize.
Do you have any upcoming events besides the one that you plugged that we're doing for prototyping in June? Do you have any more seminars or programs coming up?
Yeah, well, the one in June is the one that we have on the books at the moment. We give generally lectures and workshops such as this on prototyping, on design thinking. Throughout the school year, we collaborate with the Deming Center for Entrepreneurship on campus, so through the business school. And every fall, we have kind of a 4-part series, one of which is prototyping and one of which is ideation. And those are really catered towards students, but anyone can sign up and show up. And we typically get a few community members in those sessions. So that's something to keep an eye out for once the semester begins again in the fall.
Okay, well, I think with that, that's exciting. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for leading us through this great overview. And thanks to all of our attendees. And again, next month, we will have another program with Idea Forge. And this one is we're gonna get our hands a little dirty. It's a fun interactive activity called Intro to Prototyping on June 9th. And we need to have ready cardboard, tape, and scissors to actually build something. So I'm looking forward to that. I will be sending out a follow-up message tomorrow with the link for that program and more about how to register. But before we sign off, we would appreciate some audience feedback on this event. If you would rate our webinar, we'd appreciate it. And you'll be hearing from us soon. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.